Where do we get honeymoon from, John? Put a sock in it, John.
Why don't you tell the story of rule of thumb?
I think maybe you're showing your true colors.
There is a term that I believe almost everybody says wrong.
What about the expression, boy, you're a son of a gun?
4 commonly used expressions are actually deeply offensive.
Well, hello, world. This is Kurt Schneider, your co-host of Smart Drivel, bringing you today another snappy, snippy, snoopy, crispy version of Smart Drivel.
And I'm John Ellenthal, and it's pretty clear that Kurt hasn't left the house today.
I have not, John, and I'm ready to go.
Someone needs a little human interaction, Kurt.
I'd like to take the proverbial Kierkegaardian leap of faith and jump right into today's episode, John.
Leap away.
John, we've been told by the Drivelites, our fan base, that they've really enjoyed when they learn something different. And one particular topic we've done, which is fun phrases, we've done it twice, people seem to love. It seems to be a fan favorite of Drivel Nation. So we're going to do Fun Phrases 3 today, John.
Yet another fun phrases. I like Drivel Nation. And by the way, we decided to call them dribblers, not Drivelites.
Right. Do you know that in Montauk, they have this park? It's called Camp Hero. And in the 60s and 70s, they took kids from like riding bikes and stuff, brought them there and performed time travel and other experiments on them. And that was the whole impetus for Stranger Things on Netflix.
Why is it called Hero Park? Since hero sort of suggests that really good things happened here. Some human stepped above and did something extraordinary. Experimenting on children doesn't quite seem heroic.
You're right. It was called Camp Hero beforehand because in World War II, it was like the first and last and farthest out outpost because everyone thought that the U-boats from Germany would come get us. And they were on the edge of Montauk and they were heroes there and they had big battle guns, but they also had this wild, check it out sometime, this wild radar machine up there that would turn around. And I believe it because I read A Wrinkle in Time and I really enjoyed it.
So it was called Heroes Park before they started to experiment on children and they never changed the name?
It was called Camp Hero, correct.
That leads me to my first fun phrase.
Ready.
Perhaps we'll call it an idiom, and I'm not referring to you. What does the phrase close but no cigar mean, Kurt?
Means you don't win. You're like,
almost.
Just got there.
So I thought of close but no cigar because you were talking about adults and kids doing confusing things. So close but no cigar, which means, of course, that you were almost successful but not, actually comes from 19th century carnival life. Back then, the games at carnivals were not targeted at kids. They were targeted at adults. And rather than winning stuffed animals that kids would one day be incented to win, you would win a cigar. So when you played one of these games at the carnival and didn't win, because of course it's rigged so that you don't win all that much, you didn't get a cigar, so you were close, but no cigar.
So carnivals were amazing. They'd gone way back in time, circuses, carnivals, but really came true in 19th century America, sort of with the rise of the American desire and growth and what we were trying to do with Manifest Destiny. The carnival came up as a wonderful way to express fun and leisure time, but they had their own expression, their own language back then. You would speak carny. And in fact, wrestling derived from the carnival. And when I worked at World Wrestling Entertainment, there were still words that we used from carny. One of them was called kayfabe. And when you said kayfabe, that's when someone was coming and you stopped talking about what's going to happen in the ring because we already knew what was going to happen beforehand. So people wouldn't know it. And the other expression is a mark. If you're a huge fan, you were called a mark because during carnivals in the 19th century, if we saw someone come into the carnival with money and a bunch of kids, they literally would mark them with chalk on their back so that people would say, that's the guy to go after. And he would be close but no cigar because he would lose.
If you were alive, Kurt, in 19th century America, I'm pretty sure that you would have been in a carnival. What would you be doing in the carnival?
You know, I would have thought shooting out of the cannon would be really cool.
Are you wearing a helmet right now?
I'm not, but people think I should wear one all the time. They're very worried about me.
Yeah, well, based on your intro as well, I think it would be good if you not only wore a helmet, but perhaps a suit made of bubble wrap.
So speaking of that and shooting out of a cannon, I have a really cool, fun phrase that I'm going to tell you the origin of. That is, like, if you're going to do it, you're going to go crazy. There's an expression, pulling out all the stops.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Which means basically, means to make a great effort, right? To try to achieve something.
Do it all.
So where it comes from is from organs.
Like organ donation?
No, an organ as in a piano organ, like an organ in a church. And organs have knobs to control the volume that are called stops. And so when they're all pulled out, the organist can crank and volume can just go. There's no mitigation on any of the volume. And so you're pulling out all the stops. You are cranking.
So you let it rip. So under what conditions would they pull out all the stops on the organ?
My guess is if something great really happened, or if they just were feeling their oats, or if they were crazy as a Mad Hatter.
So normally there's a bit of a tamped down approach to organing or some sort of governor on the organ. But once in a while, when the situation called for it, you'd pull out all the stops and just let her rip.
Yep.
Well, have you ever played the organ?
No, but I'd love to. Have you?
I've never played the organ. The organist, sometimes there's an organist at baseball park stadiums.
Yes.
And there was an organist at Shea Stadium for many, many years, a very famous organist. Her name was Janice. Help me out here, Kurt.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Yeah, keep going. Just tell us the story. It doesn't matter what her name was.
Well, it does to her and her family and her descendants and her fans.
Someone in our audience will know. But anyway, yes.
Anyway, I assume when you were playing the organ at a baseball game, you would be pulling out all the stops because you need to be heard by a lot of people.
So I had a buddy of mine from high school, and somehow he got the
Jane
job.
Jarvis. Her name was Jane Jarvis. Do you remember her?
So my friend
from Shea Stadium.
My friend in high school, somehow we were, out of college. I hadn't seen this guy since high school. You're running into each other in New York City. I'm like, hey, what are you doing? Oh, I play the organ at the Rangers games.
Oh, man, that's cool. I bet you he pulls out all the stops every game.
And he would do different stuff, and he would improvise, and he'd play some of, like whatever he wanted to do, and the crowd loved it.
So that reminds me of pulling something else that relates to hockey. We used to use the expression when someone was not taking birth control because they wanted to get pregnant, that they were, quote, pulling the goalie.
Yes.
Well, you know what? It's a hockey thing. One was pulling out all the stops. One was pulling the goalie. Do you see how the pulling comes together there, Kurt?
Oh, man. Look, I think we should make like a hockey player and get the puck out of here.
Very nice. All right, I'm going to give you two fun phrases that are both fun and phrases, and they really come from the same basic idea. Slightly different origin stories, but when you think about it, you're going to go, these are basically the same idea. On an earlier episode of Fun Phrases, we talked about riding shotgun, which, of course,
yes.
when kids are in high school and there's a bunch of them, everyone wants to sit in the front seat next to the driver, so they call out shotgun.
By the way, did you ever do padiddle in high school?
I did. Is that when there was like one headlight out in a car oncoming? You'd go padiddle and you'd hit the person next to you?
Or you'd kiss the girl. You'd hit the boy and kiss the girl. And my friends and I, we used to crush each other when padiddles came.
Where does that come from, that when you see an oncoming car with one headlight, yell out a completely nonsensical word and then either hit or kiss the person next to you?
Teenagers. Where do all these drinking games come from, John? Same place.
As I said in an earlier episode of Fun Phrases, riding shotgun, basically back in the olden days when they were stagecoaches, someone would sit next to the driver. They weren't called drivers, were they?
Yes, stagecoach drivers. You had someone would sit there with a 12 gauge.
They'd sit there with a shotgun to protect the driver and the coach from robbers. Best man is actually the same thing. So this is a new entry. Best man comes from days of yore, like feudal times. There was a risk at a wedding that a neighboring or warring lord would come by the wedding and try to steal the bride. So the groom asked a best man, his best friend, to stand next to him to be ready to battle and save the bride from a lord that might want to do some damage. So they're really the same thing. Do you feel me?
So how weak is our society, John, that, we've always talked about how weak man has become over the years. So we used to have a guy standing next to us protecting our bride-to-be from being absconded with and kidnapped. And now the guy's role is to hold a diamond ring, and that's it, and give a toast.
Well,
boy.
Do you realize that today, when there are weddings, there is a much lower risk as a practical matter of a warring lord coming into the church or ceremony and stealing the bride? So the best man's role has morphed to reflect a much less dangerous circumstance, but still have your best man stand next to you and be a part of the moment.
That's too bad. I like the other one. Gilgamesh, who we've talked about in the past.
And when you say we mean you.
Gilgamesh was granted as king of the city he lived in, that on the wedding days, he would take the bride's virginity at the wedding day before the husband would be able to consummate the marriage. So if the husband had a best man, maybe he'd fight Gilgamesh off, but they didn't have best men back then.
Was Gilgamesh big? Was he armed?
He was huge, and he was king, and he was half god, half man.
He must have had like a big beard, right?
Yes, he did. Okay. So can we stick with the connubial bliss, John, and give you, this is not really a phrase, but it's a word, honeymoon. Where do we get honeymoon from, John?
I don't know, Kurt. Do you?
I do. Well, ancient drinks like mead were made with honey. And a lot of other drinks in every religion, honey was because it's been around forever, and also we know it doesn't spoil. You were supposed to, for a month after you got married, drink a honey drink every night. It was supposed to be for good luck and to aid in fertility. So you did it from one full moon to the next.
To aid in fertility or to aid in fertility? There's a big difference there. Is infertility one word or is infertility two words? I suspect you mean two words.
Yes, I had a space in my mind between in and fertility.
Thank you for the clarification. Please continue.
Okay, so that's honeymoon. So, John.
Yeah.
We talked before about volume control and pulling out all the stops. There's another expression that has to do with volume control. And it's a great expression. And, our parents used to use it all the time. And I feel it comes from like 1950s sitcoms. Put a sock in it.
Yes, I've definitely used that expression. So put a sock in it suggests that you might do something to limit the volume because it's a muffler, whereas pulling out all the stops is not a muffler.
You're right. So it means to shut up, right? Put a sock in it. You're telling someone to shut up. And where it came from, late 19th century, we had gramophones. Gramophones did not have any volume knob on them, but they had these big sort of, ear things that came out. And so people would literally, not figuratively, literally take off their woolen socks and stuff it in the gramophone in order to control the volume. Put a sock in it, John.
There was a way to muffle the sound, to tamp down the noise.
That is correct.
Well, that's pretty cool. I like that one, Kurt. That's a good one. I would like to appeal to your better angels, or your better angel, my better angel, and the better angel of Drivel Nation by pointing out 4 commonly used expressions that you and I use all the time without thinking twice, that when you dig deep into and see where they came from, are actually deeply offensive to some people. So prepare to pare down your vocabulary, Kurt. Are you ready?
I am so ready, and I'm so open, and I think society's ready for this, John.
I hope society's ready and certainly is timely. Cakewalk. I'll give you all of them first, and then I'll tell you what they mean. Cakewalk.
Yeah.
Nitty gritty.
Yeah.
Master bedroom.
Excuse me?
And rule of thumb are all based in
misogyny.
Well, not just misogyny, Kurt, but also racism, slavery, things like that. So let me walk you through each one, and then you and I are going to commit to not use these expressions no more.
Have you ever been in a cakewalk, by the way?
Are you using the more modern explanation of what it means?
I'm using it like at a fair. So I went to the Edgewood Fair in like 1973, and I was in a cakewalk. And you walk, it's kind of like musical chairs, and you stop, and the winner gets a cake.
So I'd like to point out that is a modern interpretation of the cakewalk, but the original cakewalk, not so nice.
Ooh, tell me.
Although there is a commonality there in that the winner gets a cake. So,
but there's also the expression today, sorry, John, is, oh, he won in a cakewalk, meaning they won it easily.
It was
right?
easy. Right, it was easy.
Okay.
So I came across a Medium article recently by someone by the name of Shariah Agarwal, and I probably mispronounced the name, and I'm sorry about that. But cakewalk actually refers to a pre-Civil War dance that was typically done on slave plantations for the slave owner, and the slave owner would choose the slave that did the best cakewalk dance and give that slave a cake. So it's born out of slavery, and it was entertainment for the plantation owner, the slave owner. So when you use the term cakewalk, knowing that, you can no longer use it in good conscience. Similarly, nitty-gritty, which is sort of the get to the bottom of something, all the details.
Yeah.
Nitty-gritty actually in its original form refers to the bottom portions of a ship, the hold, where they would typically transport slaves. And there are some people that think the nitty is another way of saying the N-word, but it refers to the part of the ship underneath everything else where the slaves were being transported. Those both relate directly to slavery. So strike nitty-gritty. And master bedroom, as you pointed out, had to do with misogyny.
As does the second one, rule of thumb. I know that.
Yeah, and this, I'll let you tell that one in a second, but not only does it deal in restricting women's rights, but it also has a racist, because back when they were colonial estates and there was a feudal hierarchy, there was a lot of segregation, and only some people were allowed to go into the big house, and no people of color were allowed to go into the master bedroom. So it was the domain of white people. And of course, master is male. And it was also reference to the fact that women could not be property owners. So believe it or not, Kurt, in a sign of progress, I know people are going to accuse us of being too PC, but when you really understand where these things come from, what choice do you have? The National Association of Home Builders, Kurt, have now replaced the term master bedroom with primary bedroom. All right. So you also rule of thumb, which is also highly misogynistic. Why don't you tell the story of rule of thumb?
I think, and I could be wrong, but I think you were allowed to beat your wife with a stick as long as it was smaller than the size of your thumb.
That's right. There was a judge in 17th century England who made that ruling that allowed you to beat your wife with a specific size stick. So I'm going to recap and rule of thumb, master bedroom, nitty gritty, and cakewalk. Not so good, Kurt.
Let's move on. Thank you for sharing that, though. And I'm glad we did that, because I bet you there's so many expressions that people use innocuously, or they think innocuously, and it's obviously not, because there's some meaning behind it, and they all have origins, these phrases.
I really hope we're not trying to come off preachy here. These were just things that we learned along the way that when you really sort of get underneath them, you're like, whoa.
Well, John, I think maybe you're showing your true colors.
Well, depending on what that means, thank you or screw you.
So showing your true colors is to reveal one's true character, right? Or true intentions. You're showing your true colors. Where this comes from, old warships, John, out at sea, to confuse their enemies, would use multiple flags flying, many different ones.
Right.
However, the rules of warfare dictated that the ships must show their actual flags before firing upon others, therefore showing their true colors.
Oh, very nice. Well, that makes sense, because to shoot at somebody while pretending to be somebody else does seem unfair, but I'm surprised that, because in war, lots of ugliness happens. I'm surprised there was a lot of respect for that.
Well, it's amazing,
Because didn't spies sort of pretend, or embeds pretend that they were part of a group that they were not a part of? So
I think navies, there's a whole thing when you're out on the sea.
There's a code.
Yes, and I think they probably struck to it versus other people. Like the land fighting in the Revolutionary War, that's where we get, guerrilla warfare, was the Americans hiding behind trees and stuff. The British were still going by the rules of warfare, where we march in lines and the next line and the next line. And the Americans are like, screw that. We're going to stand behind trees and ping, ping, ping.
There's a real asymmetry when one group is willing to live by the rules and protocols and code of what they thought was today was certainly yesterday. Another group is. It creates real problems. Kurt, what would you say your Achilles heel is?
That my Achilles tendonitis really hurts me a lot. So
I love when you answer questions with a real literal answer. It's just a total shock. So we went to town on a recent episode talking about the pomegranate and Hades and Persephone and Demeter and that whole story. So I'd like to go back to that well.
Demeter, I don't even know her.
I'm doing a podcast with Henny Youngman here. I'd like to go back to a little Greek mythology for Achilles' heel.
Yes.
So Achilles, when he was a baby, his mother dipped him in the river Styx.
Yes.
Because the river Styx was thought to be a source of great power and invulnerability.
And not a terrible 1970s pop band.
Oh, they're not terrible. Come sail away, Kurt.
You know what the problem with Come Sail Away is? You want it to be such a good song and you're waiting, and it just never gets there. It's like, come sail away, and just not, you want it to be better than it is.
Kurt, you have expressed during the course of our podcast some really antisocial views toward popular music of our youth.
Just the Eagles.
I just want to tell you that I really like Styx. I don't know the last time I heard a Styx song. Didn't they sing Domo Arigato, Mr. Roboto? Now, on that one, I agree that's not a good song. Was that theirs?
I don't know. All I know is Come Sail Away, and you expect it to be great, and it's not.
The river Styx, the mother dips Achilles in, but she's holding Achilles basically by the heels. So he gets completely coated by the river and its invulnerability.
Yes.
Except where the mother was holding him. And later, Achilles was killed when he took an arrow into his heel.
The one place. That is his point and source of vulnerability. And that's why we have the expression Achilles' heel. Yes.
Yes.
I love how they go back to Greek mythology. I like
Greek mythology.
I know you do. And you know it very well. It's awesome. It reminded me, I just read something about Shirley Jackson, The Lottery. Remember that? It was a book we all had to read. It was a short story. You remember it. I'll tell you the story about this small town. And once a year, they pick a lottery. And Tess Hutchinson, the mother that year, picks it. And she gets stoned to death, including by her own kids. Yeah. It was written and it was first published in the New Yorker about 60 years ago. And it caused a lot of people in the New Yorker to cancel their subscriptions. John, what about the expression, boy, you're a son of a gun?
Ah, yeah.
It's an affectionate, right, little way to speak to someone.
Well, it depends on the tone of voice, because it could be said angrily, too.
So I think in the affectionate way, we're back in the day and we're on the water again. Sailors would go sometimes for long voyages. And on occasion, they were allowed to bring along their wives, John.
Really?
Yes. And sometimes there would be some, marital bliss going on, and the wives would get pregnant and they would have to give birth on the boat. The most private place to give birth on the boat was in between the cannons on the gun deck. And that was maximum privacy. So boys that were born on the ship were called a son of a gun because they were born in between the guns.
That's good. And of course, it reminds me of our first episode of Fun Phrases when we went into detail on freezing the balls off a brass monkey. Which shockingly relates to what you just said.
It does.
And I will let our listeners try to figure out the connection so we don't retell that story.
John, I have another quick one.
Oh, please.
This is one that people say, and they get it wrong all the time. People usually say, oh, I'm in like Flint. It's in like Flynn.
Yeah, Flynn, right?
Errol Flynn.
Ooh, really? Can I interrupt your story?
Yes.
With a completely unrelated, but kind of related, because I thought of it, story?
John, I like to be very linear in my mind's progression in the way I talk about things.
Right, so let me say it differently. May I seek revenge for your very strange interruptions that have nothing to do with the stated topic of the podcast with one of my own?
For sure.
There's a term, much like in like Flint is misunderstood because it's really in like Flynn. There is a term that I believe almost everybody says wrong, and it refers to the things held by cheerleaders.
Pom-poms.
Would you spell
P-O-M-P-O-M.
P-O-M-P-O-M? That's where the problem comes in. Even though it is now accepted as pom-pom, like you described, because it's been said wrong so many times, it's just become the new norm. It is actually, believe it or not, a pom-pon. The second word is P-O-N. Pom-pon is the actual term.
Who knew?
But I found that out. I was very surprised. And apparently, despite many years having passed, I'm still surprised.
I love that.
It's kind of like in like Flynn.
So in like Flynn was Errol Flynn, who was this swashbuckling. In fact, he played a swashbuckler a lot. Actor who was apparently very handsome, but who also really enjoyed being a man about town with all the co-stars. And so if you were to do well and have a nice date on your arm or go someplace else, you were in like Flynn.
That's cool. I think we need to wrap up today's episode. Fun phrases is fun, and I'm really glad that we've done our third episode on it. It's yet more fun phrases, and I'm sure we'll be back again to do another because there's seemingly an infinite list of these, and the backstories are downright interesting.
Yeah, and we learn a lot, and there's a couple more I have that I'm going to save for the next one, John.
Oh, that's not fair. What a teaser. Well done, Kurt. Well done. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Kurt, for this conversation. We hope you enjoyed this week's episode. We, as usual, strive to promise the dribble and hope for the smart.
Toodaloo, everyone.
Goodbye, everybody.